In life for the past 54 years has been to get a important reality understood more widely, uh, believing it would have a beneficial impact if people understood what I had to say about that particular essential point to put fundamental questions in an importantly different light. Like, how are we to think of ourselves as a species, and why has our history been the way it has been, and where are we in the course of the story of humankind? Those are the things that I thought were put into a fundamentally different light by the idea that came to me in 1970 and that eventually got published in the University of California Press as The Parable of the Tribes, the problem of power and social evolution. But I've been working ever since in developing this thing I'm now calling a better human story. Into a variety of other dimensions, which lead me to claim that this integrated picture holds water, that is fundamentally valid, sufficiently valid to need to be taken into consideration as we behold ourselves and our world, and that it can be shown, compellingly argued, in some cases, I think, proved that the following things are true. And I ask you, what if it could be proved to you that the following were true? For example, that the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large, which means proving essentially that we are better creatures than we have imagined ourselves to be. Does not establish how much better. But that it raises that question, because there is a dynamic that I think I proved would inevitably arise with any creature that steps across the path into the path of civilization. An inevitable byproduct of that is that a destructive force will get unleashed, not being a function of the nature of the creature. It's got to do with a systemic dynamic, which I really, to me, it's proven. Nobody's refuted in all these years. It has bigger implications, such as that not only is the ugliness of our history not a clear window into what we are by nature as creatures, but in addition, it calls our attention to a social evolutionary force I claim would arise on any planet where a creature steps onto the path of civilization. It invents things which help allow it to escape from the niche in which it evolved biologically. That escape seems to be into a kind of freedom, but I think I prove that there is a force that arises of a social evolutionary nature driving things in a particular direction. That's a function of the inevitable systemic properties that step onto civilization, which is, in a nutshell, there will be a kind of anarchy which has enormous ramifications, and that's inevitable. So any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos that takes that step, they're going to get swept up into the same kind of destructive and tormented process that we see written in the history books of our species on this planet. So that was the big thing that changed the course of my life. And I already thought when it was just that, well, it was a lot, and developed it in a way which integrated history, biological evolution, anthropology, economics, political science, all of which I was examined on it. When that got me my doctor's degree, actually. But it raised a lot of questions. It sort of opened the door to certain kinds of questions. One of them had to do with the impact of that destructive force on our species. Not, and it's basically, there's a lot of injury that's caused. First of all, the anarchy means a war of all against all, and all the things you see in history and inscribed in the monuments of the Middle East and all that stuff. It was just, there's a lot of cities being put to the sword, people being dragged off to slavery, whole armies killing each other in enormous numbers. A lot of stuff that was inevitable and would be true wherever civilization emerged. So there's this destructive force that I claim that I can show. It's over the course of a lot of years of exploring the nature of this destructive force, I discovered that you could meaningfully show that what gets unleashed becomes, phrasing I use is, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse, that there's something really somewhat central to the story of our species, which can be described as a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. That took me, well, I don't know exactly how long it took me, but a few years after that, I looked at the effects of trauma on human beings and how that helped to generate a coherent force of that sort. And then also I looked at the way the war of all against all that comes out of anarchy meant that there would be a selection among all the cultural possibilities that would drive things in the direction of power, inevitably, regardless of the nature of the creature that steps onto that path. It's just an enormously consequential thing to do, to leave the order in which you evolved, which we're the only creature actually to do that. And it took 3.5 billion years to get there. And then there's this new thing, which had enormous ramifications, which I'm maintaining. People, for whatever reasons, have not looked at the enormous ramifications of leaving the natural order and entering into an inevitable disorder that unleashes a destructive force, that unleashes a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse or more broken. And then sort of demonstrating that you can see this force. And I've got two ways of showing it. One that's sort of static, that you find a particular actor in the world. It's something, everything it does makes things worse. I've studied several of these, most recent of which is today's Republican Party. But that's the direction of saying, well, some of this is important to know because it helps you recognize what you're up against when something destructive emerges in your world, which has happened. And the people with a secular worldview who acknowledge the evolutionary process that Darwin talks about have not looked into at what it means to step onto the path of civilization. If you look at it in evolutionary perspective, where evolution is something which is selected for kinds of synergy, making sure all the interactions sort of work to perpetuate the thing. And here a species leaves that and becomes an actor in the situation that's not regulated by any kind of order. Nothing's evolved yet to contain this new life form, which is not the product of biological evolution, but is the product of the evolution of things made by the creative intelligence of the creature. That's new. And new means disordered in this world, apparently. So I claim then that part of this better human story is to say, it's inevitable that there will arise a force of brokenness if a creature does what we did 10 or 12,000 years ago, after 3.5 billion years of life's evolving. That there will be a force of brokenness that sometimes will take over a nation, sometimes will take over a region, and that was in the case of what led to the American Civil War, a nation like Nazi Germany, that there is a coherent force that sometimes can be seen because you can infer that it's driving what that thing does. It's been taken over by it. And incidentally, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. If something were like that, I think it's reasonable to call it a force of evil, not in a supernatural way, and not having to do specifically with, like people being the source of it, but as a systemic thing that arises inevitably for a creature that steps onto the path of civilization, that's extricated itself from the niche in the natural order in which it evolved. And then, as I've been working on this and saying that there exists in the world something that's reasonable to call evil, the whole question of value has continually knocked on the door. Even that idea from 1970, there's a chapter there called A Natural Theory of Value, or maybe that's a section or something. But anyway, the secular worldview has given the dimension of value, the difference between right and wrong, more good and evil, whole morality thing, whole dimension that it gets a second-rate existence from the much of the secular worldview. And I claim that I can prove that that is an erroneous way of looking at it. I claim that the value is real. I can essentially show that in a rationally acceptable, logic empirical way that social theorists should employ, that there is a reality there that is important and that is there for a reason, demonstrably, in an evolutionary perspective, that proves that it is life-serving. There is a dimension of experience in certain creatures, at least including us, that creates value as an emergent reality. Maybe there's no value in the world where the first self-replicating things were. I don't know where the line is, but the important thing is that we do know that we crossed it. We and a lot of other species have crossed it. For us, there is a better and a worse. And other than something meaning and experience is better and worse, what the hell else can value ultimately mean? In a world in which there was nothing of any, nothing to experience, one thing is better and one other is worse. Not even a God who's pleased with the light, but nothing. What difference can anything make? But things do make a difference to the likes of us and my kitty cats. And that means that value has emerged at some point in the process of the evolution of life. And it's there for a reason. It can be shown that evolutionarily we're given experiential tendencies that lead to our doing what you got to do to win the game of natural selection, which is to get your DNA into the future. So the things that we're motivated to do because we experience them as better and motivated to avoid getting into because we experience them as worse is directly aligned with what kind of behavior was conducive in the ancestral past to getting their DNA into the future. We're not a blank slate. Anybody who thought we were a blank slate, I mean, it's kind of amazing that sometimes when you think about what such smart people seem to be willing to say. And Descartes thinking that the screams of agony of a dog being tortured were just the same as metal scraping metal, that they didn't have any consciousness or experience, or however he put it. I mean, how do you believe these things? But in any event, there is within us a meaningful division between better and worse, and it's an experiential dimension gives rise to it. And it is put there because it is life-serving, or it tends to be life-serving. Perfect correlations, selective process. But it's not random which of our ancestors got their DNA into the future and which petered out. The ones who did what they should, I mean, anybody can get hit by lightning, but the ones that did what survival required, the ones who were motivated to or perceived things in a way, all the stuff that created us was a lot of people surviving better because they were more like this than they were like that. So there is a source within us that pushes us toward what is, in a meaningful sense, the real and discernible thing called the good. Registered both in terms of the experience, the fulfillment level versus agony level of experience, and also in terms of advancing the cause of life over death. As I've indicated, the question of whether a living planet is, in some basic sense, better than a dead planet, I don't know how to solve that problem. But given that we got life, we got needs, we got feelings, and so do a lot of other creatures. And life thriving is better than life suffering. So there is a coherent force that really emerges from what was selected for to become our experiential tendencies. And that puts value back into the worldview of even people with a secular worldview. People with a religious worldview haven't had any problem having value there. The difference between good and evil is right there in the beginning of Genesis. There's a tree about knowing good and evil that you're not supposed to eat of. I mean, that was there from the beginning. But with the secular worldview, what are we talking about? You don't have any supernatural thing anymore. But there is actually a force reasonable to call evil, and there is within us, as a branch as we are out of the tree of life, that branch which brings value into the world, there is a better and a worse, and we are motivated to behave in ways that are aligned with the good. So we have, if a creature extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, there will inevitably arise a couple of coherent forces. And I haven't demonstrated the coherence of the force of the good. And actually, I'm not sure how much I've done it in my writings either. But I don't think it's a hard thing. And I have for the force that's reasonable to call evil. There will inevitably be, at the center of their unfolding drama of civilization, a battle between two coherent forces. One that consistently works to make things worse, that got unleashed when the natural order got broken out of, and one that consistently works to make things more whole. That life-serving thing that's built into us that corresponds with our own feeling better and fulfillment. At the center of its drama, then, a battle between two coherent forces, reasonable to call good and evil. So that's another piece that's integrated with this whole thing. That's if it could be proved that those were true, wouldn't it be important to know that we're better creatures than we've thought ourselves to be? And wouldn't it be important to know that the realm of value deserves our full respect and allegiance? Not a second-rate, it's just a matter of opinion. Oh, it's all subjective. experiential realm being essential to any kind of value. Of course, it's going to be subjective, but that subjectivity is not random. We may have our own differences among us, just like we do in terms of our faces and stuff like that. But there is basically an inborn human system of value that we have just as much in common as with the structure of our noses. And it's there because it's important and life-serving. It helped our ancestors get their DNA into the future. We should honor it. We should look to it for guidance, not this second-class citizenship, which I believe, by the way, connects with how come liberal America was failed to rally to defend the things that should have been defended in what has been visibly since the early 90s, an ever-escalating battle between good and evil. Escalating because the power of evil has been increasing. And it's been increasing because the secular worldview does not call adequate attention to a dimension of our reality which can be called a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken, which has taken over conservative America in our times. And if we had recognized it more fully, what was going on, we could have prevented that. We, on the pro-democracy side, on the liberal side, on the secular worldview side. But we've got an America where we've got two different sides in a sick relationship to the idea of the battle between good and evil. On the Republican side, on the conservative American side, they have embraced believing it to be good, a force that is consistently working to make things more broken. Just so obvious, but I have failed with however many hundreds of op-eds I've thrown off into my red congressional district. I have failed to bring the people around here back to being in alignment with the things that make things more whole, which is the values that they used to express, but here they are embracing this other thing. Major psychological mystery to be solved and to be countered if our society is ever to be healthy again. And then on the liberal side, the failure to see something because I'm proposing, I don't know that I'm proving, I won't claim that for this. I am proposing that liberal America did not see that there was a coherent force of destruction and brokenness, evil, taking over the right. And at least a big part of why they didn't perceive it was they didn't have any way of conceptualizing it. So this better human story of mine, if it were true that I could show that there's a way of conceptualizing this that doesn't rely upon Satan and the devil and supernatural and all of that, to be able to make visible to those of us who need to fight against it, that there is a force out there that you might as well call evil if you're willing, because that's the way it acts. And here's how to understand how it works. And it's not something which doesn't demonize people. I mean, people can get possessed by the demonic force of things. But there's nothing about this idea of fighting a battle against evil that requires hatred or against other people. There but for the grace of God, etc. It does important. Has been important to recognize the reality of the battle between good and evil, because America has been engaged in that battle with the force of the good pretty much asleep for a rather long part of this last 34 years. So my mission is to get these ideas out there, which I claim that I can argue each one pretty well, and that they are all integrated with each other. Well, in addition to the moral dimension, I have a similar evolutionary perspective to show that the spiritual dimension we can infer logically is there in us, we can see factually, and it wouldn't be in there unless its impact was to help people choose things that would enable their DNA, to serve life over death, basically. Uh, that's why they're there. And we know they're there because every human culture and practically every human community and a good share of human lives has a special dimension of experience that people talk about in particular ways, which, I won't go into here, but they're very deep, and they're saying this is really where it's at. And they bring back the truths that are given a special status of important spiritual truth. A spiritually transformative experience is a widespread human phenomenon, which means I'd say, inarguably, we have an inborn capacity for such experience. Whether everybody gets it or it's just some people, but its universality proves that it has been selected for, and it wouldn't be selected for unless those who had that capacity tended, it's always only tended to get their DNA into the future more successfully than the other people of their general genetic community who lacked that, who are not moving into having those kinds of experiences. In other words, we should tune in on that level of experience because it's there as an experiential capacity. As it's proof that it helped our ancestors do things which led to their survival, which I think can be translated into saying it tends to be a source of good guidance, good being labeled by maybe both. It's fulfilling to find one's spiritual path, and leading on to having descendants who get the DNA that gave the ancestor the capacity to have that kind of experience. We should listen to the moral dimension and give it honor and force, which has not been what we've heard from the democratic or liberal world over the last 30 some years. It has not had that kind of deep, vibrant force that comes from being connected with your moral and spiritual passions, which is something more likely to happen if you recognize that both the moral dimension and the spiritual dimension are real, are important, and are demonstrably there because as proving that they were life-serving. And once we tune into those things, which are very powerful things and motivated, and liberal America has lacked that depth of motivation. The good lack all conviction, while the evil are filled with this passionate intensity. Too much describes where we've been in America for the last generation. That's not an inevitable part of the forces of democracy. Pro-democracy has in American history, like under FDR, been a major moral force that impacted the world. We need to make it that again. And I believe that understanding things in these ways, these amendations to the current secular worldview that took on Darwin but didn't follow through with some of the implications of what happens when there's a breakout from natural selection. If you think that it would be of value if it were sort of somewhat generally recognized out there as a big part of the whole world of collective thought, that we're better creatures, that our history's ugliness is not here on us, that any creature on any planet, that there that the step onto civilization unleashes something which is a destructive force that actually operates much as evil is traditionally understood. If you could, people would recognize that what we're engaged in is as the creatures that inadvertently unleashed all this stuff when we became the most creative and creatively intelligent creatures in the history of life on Earth, the ones who could break out of that evolved niche, unleash this force that wasn't foreseeable, and get caught up into this kind of history. If we could see that we're really kind of the victims of our own creative potential. It's an inevitable thing that any creature on any planet, if life evolves to the point where there's a creature intelligent enough to break out of the biological niche on that planet, they're also going to get swept up in this thing. So we should see ourselves differently. I think that we seeing ourselves as better creatures than we thought we were will help us to envision the kind of better world. That if you think that we are as depraved as we've been taught we are, you're not going to picture a world in which people are a lot better. I mean, I don't know how good we can be, but I do feel that it's not a trivial amount better than we imagine. And envisioning that possibility, I think, can have a beneficial effect. And if you think that all these things, if they were proven, would in fact advance the cause of humankind at this moment in our social evolutionary process, where we can see that in the not too many coming generations, one way or another, we're either going to have to get our act together, which means bringing that destructive force under control much better, or as we continue to play Russian roulette with our capacity as a civilization to destroy ourselves, we will end up destroying ourselves if we don't get our act together better. And that's one of the crucial things I think that this understanding of our past says about our future, that we really need to be thinking that we're at a place where we either got to rush to get our act together, or we're either through a nuclear holocaust or environmental disasters. We're going to bring this whole thing down upon us. That possibility is quite visible in both of those respects. And in order to prevent them, there's a lot of stuff that we got to do to make the world a different place. And our job then is to envision, well, where do we need to get to? And so I think that this perspective that I'm offering and that I'm claiming that can be proven, a lot of these things are largely true, valid, inescapable in view of the logic and the evidence. Much of it anyhow. If you agree that that would help us make the forces of life and wholeness more likely to prevail over the force that might lead to the destruction of human civilization and maybe of life on Earth, depending on how we go. If you think that these ways of seeing things would be worth checking out in case they were true, so that we would move into the future thinking more clearly about the nature of the challenges that we face, to order our civilization well enough and soon enough to prevent our destroying ourselves, then I think that vision, if it actually delivered what it claimed, could be of beneficial, have a beneficial impact of some degree worth striving for. Please go check it out on abetterhumanstory.org and see if the goods get delivered to your satisfaction. I'm not afraid of being put to the test. That's what I'm here seeking. Because the idea that we might be able to fortify the forces of wholeness, whether it's the pro-democracy forces in America right now, or the forces to bring our world economy into harmony with the needs of the planet, It is so essential that we do all that we can to bring this destructive force that we see at work in Ukraine and we see at work in this extreme weather that is gathering momentum that threatens various forms of destruction. I lay it out there. I welcome being put to the test. And I would really welcome any help in getting this stuff out there before I kick the bucket. There's a lot to love in this world. From the biosphere to the potential of every human being to the image of just and kind and caring societies versus their opposite. What wouldn't one do with all that in jeopardy as we can see that it is? Please check it out. abetterhumanstory.org. I'm Andy Schmuckler.